Action PC Football claims to be one of the most realistic computer football simulations on the market. Though the graphics don't really look like much, the gameplay is actually really fascinating, and the coaching challenge is much better than more famous graphical games. In fact, the truth is that this game is so realistic that it really can be a major challenge. I mean, there are no money plays here, there are no cheap tricks or anything like that that will work. You really have to treat every single game that you play as if you were actually the head coach, and sometimes that means facing an impossible task. Well, I've decided to do a complete realignment of the 1984 college football season. Now, Dave Cook Sports doesn't actually offer the 1984 season for sale. I had to download this community-created version. I then did a little bit of research to determine which of the 105 teams to include in a 64-team league. I looked both at interesting matchups and at things that I thought would be fun. I also spent some time designing a balanced schedule that would be 14 games, home and away with every team in every conference. Conferences have 8 teams, and there are 8 of them. I'll go into more detail about that schedule in a later video. Now, the reason why I set it up like this is because I wanted to get rid of any idea of rankings, and frankly, because the way that college football works is inherently unfair. So, in this world that I've created, success means beating the other teams in your conference, which then allows you to get to the postseason with 8 teams. There's no wild cards, there's no second place teams, there's no ranking, nothing. You have to win. Naturally, this brings up some matches that never happened in real life, like today's game, which is Auburn at Kentucky. I'm controlling the home team in all of these games, and of course that's going to be a problem. So Kentucky wasn't bad in 1984, but they weren't Auburn. And Auburn, as you remember, had Bo Jackson, who was arguably one of the greatest running backs in the entire history of college football. Well, Bo Jackson, as you know, won the Heisman Trophy in 1985, which was the next season. Now, Bo Jackson did wind up injured in 1984. He suffered a shoulder injury against Texas early in the season. Well, presumably Jackson is set up on this disc to experience an injury at some point in the season. However, as long as he's around, he's going to be a major problem that our defense will have to handle. Now, I'll be really frank with you guys, I'm still learning how to play this game. It's incredibly complex, and there are all sorts of options and switches and all sorts of things to learn. And honestly, not even the official strategy guide really helps that much. Okay, this is the official strategy guide. It's about 15 years old now. Just look at the table of contents. It basically tells you what certain plays do, but it doesn't provide much actual strategy. This section on defense is actually a guide on the mechanics of the game, like a manual. There's no actual strategy here. For example, the first page tells you how to call a defensive play. Nowhere does it say what you should keep in mind when you blitz, for example, or what impact keying the wrong runner might have. Now, I know that those of you who have a lot of experience playing the game will tell me to go in and use something like the play analysis tool to see what percentages the computer gives me. And sure, that's fine for like an individual play in an individual situation, but I'm really looking for something that's more general than that. To be specific, in this case, I want to know how to stop Bo Jackson. Okay, we'll keep this simple. We're going to focus on only a few defensive techniques here. One is this ability to key a runner, and that means that our linebackers are looking for that player to run, but it also means that the quarterback might pass the ball right over the top of us. Another technique is to call a blitz. You might not think that this would work against the run, but it actually can. When you use a blitz with a run defense, it calls it a run blitz, what a name, and can really be effective, especially if you can predict which side of the field the runner is likely to come through. And finally, we're going to consider shifting the line. We're going to try to predict what direction Bo Jackson is going to run, and we'll try to shift things that way to stop him. So there's more that I can use, but I've got to save something else for future videos, right? So we're going to try to keep this as simple as we can, and we're going to stick to some of the things we just mentioned. Now here on the second play of the game, we keyed Jackson looking for the run. They passed instead, but couldn't find anyone open. So Washington tried to dump it to Jackson, and we intercepted the pass. If you've played a lot of action PC football, you know that the computer just loves to dump it off to the running back. Well, this is one way to stop that from happening. Now, before we go much further, I do want you to notice something here. Our corners and defensive backs have a big ratings advantage over the Auburn backs and wide receivers. You see, when you come down to it, action PC football really isn't all about stats like yards per carry. It's about those raw ratings that the players have. Higher numbers are better, and so you're going to be better off if you have a highly rated cornerback covering a lower rated receiver. In that play, Calhoun on the left-hand side had a significant advantage over Wagan, and he was the one who wound up making the interception. And over on the right-hand side, Douglas had a little bit of an advantage over Buford. With that kind of matchup, I decided to use man coverage instead of a zone, and I felt confident with the run defense even if they decided to pass. Now, that's going to depend on the season that you choose and whether you choose college or the NFL. It's a lot more common in the NFL to see offenses that have multiple weapons, for example. In general, however, my rule is to use zone when the defense is at a disadvantage, as in where the ratings for the offensive players, the receivers, are higher, and to use man when we've got an advantage. So in this case, we shifted the line to our right, guessing that Jackson was going that way, and we were right. Now, you really want to be careful shifting the line. You'll run into a problem if you guess wrong, but if you guess right, you're going to have a lot of success. Well, in this case, we keyed Bo Jackson, who was the tailback in the eye. They gave it to Tommy Agee instead, and he really damaged us. And in this case, constantly looking for Jackson left us wide open, which led to this 29-yard touchdown pass. And in the end, that's really what action PC football is all about. It's a guessing game. It's sort of like that old Stratomatic football board game. Guess right and you'll be a hero. Guess wrong though and you might really be punished, depending on how good your players are, of course. Well, unfortunately, we came just short in the end. We lost this game 13-9. However, we were able to hold Auburn to only 132 yards rushing. Our problem was our offense, not our defense. And Bo Jackson, despite 19 carries, only managed 41 yards for a 2.2 yards per carry average. Well, that gives you an idea of what you can do. Now, one of the keys is to scout the other team as well as you can before the game, which can be a little hard if you're like me and you're playing at like 8 o'clock at night. But if you figure out beforehand what they do well, if you know what your team does well, and if you figure out their weakness and what your weakness is, you can come up with a strategy to be successful. So in this case, I knew that we had an advantage in the passing game and that I could take the risk and focus a little bit more on the run game and Bo Jackson specifically. So even though we ended up losing by 4 in this game, honestly, I would consider holding Bo Jackson to only 41 yards to really be a great success. Let me know what you think down below.